You can hear the drums before you can see anything. A rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat pounding through the cold January air as 3,000 men, veterans of Salamanca, of Vitoria, of Toulouse, step off into the dark. The ground smells of sulfur and river mud. The bayonets are fixed, the ranks are dressed. These are the finest infantry the British Empire has ever produced, men who helped break Napoleon himself. On the far side of a muddy ditch, a ragged army of frontiersmen, pirates, and militiamen waits in absolute silence. The most important port in North America lies at their backs. And in less than 30 minutes, less time than it takes to brew a pot of coffee, this field will be carpeted with red-coated dead. Here is the detail that makes January 8, 1815, one of history's most brutal ironies. 2 weeks before the first cannon fired, diplomats in Ghent, Belgium signed a peace treaty ending the War of 1812. The war was already over, but the news could only travel as fast as a ship, and that ship had not yet arrived. So on the morning of January 8th, 3,000 men would march into a corridor of death, fighting with total conviction for a war that their governments had already decided to end. Every single death that morning was, in the truest sense of the word, unnecessary. The British Expeditionary Force, roughly 8,000 strong, sailed from Jamaica under sealed orders and an atmosphere of absolute confidence. Their commander was Major General Sir Edward Pakenham, the Duke of Wellington's own brother-in-law, a decorated officer forged in the fire of the Peninsular War. He expected to crush a colonial backwater militia. He did not expect Andrew Jackson. Jackson arrived in New Orleans in December of 1814, gaunt from dysentery, burning with a ferocity that unsettled even his own officers. He immediately declared martial law, a legally dubious, tactically brilliant decision, and began welding the city's wildly diverse population into something resembling a fighting force. His personality defined his strategy, aggressive, direct, and utterly unyielding. The two forces met first in a sharp night skirmish on December 23rd, when Jackson lunged forward and struck the British advance camp without warning. He took casualties. But he sent an unmistakable message that the man defending New Orleans was not the kind of commander who waited to be attacked. Pakenham received that message and chose to ignore it. That choice would cost him everything. Understand the geography and you understand everything. The strip of land between the Mississippi River and the cypress swamp is roughly a mile wide. But swamp, standing water, and saturated marsh eat into that width until the practical corridor for any attacker narrows to a killing ground perhaps half a mile across, flat, open, without a single fold of terrain to shelter behind. Jackson looked at this geography and recognized not a weakness, but a fortress. He ordered the Rodriguez Canal deepened into a proper ditch, the excavated earth piled high into a rampart, and hundreds of cotton bales commandeered from nearby plantations stacked along the top to absorb musket fire. Artillery batteries were positioned at intervals across the entire mile-wide line, their fields of fire sweeping every inch of the open ground ahead. He placed his Kentucky and Tennessee frontiersmen, men who had hunted deer since boyhood and rarely missed, directly behind the parapet. Then he placed John Lafitte's pirates at the guns. Pakenham's plan, meanwhile, was built on a single critical assumption. His advance parties would carry fascines, bundles of sugarcane stalks, to fill the American ditch and wooden ladders to scale the rampart on the far side. Without those tools, the assault could not succeed. Remember that detail. It will return. The assault plan required 3 moving parts to synchronize perfectly. The main infantry columns would attack the American line from the front. A flanking force would cross the Mississippi by boat, land on the west bank, and silence the American artillery from behind, crucially reducing the fire that would tear into the advancing columns. And the advance parties with the fascines and ladders would ensure the main force could actually cross the ditch and scale the wall. Every single component began to fail before the sun rose. The canal connecting to the boat launch had partially collapsed. The Mississippi's current was far stronger than anticipated. There simply were not enough vessels. The flanking force that was supposed to neutralize the American West Bank artillery would not reach the far shore until the main assault was already underway, or already over. Pakenham knew. Reports reached him in the darkness confirming the flanking force was hopelessly delayed. He faced a simple choice: delay the assault and wait for coordination, or attack now and trust the momentum of 3,000 veterans to carry the line before the American guns could do their worst. He had already lost the element of surprise. Jackson's scouts had been tracking British movements through the bayous for days. The American line was fully manned, every cannon loaded, every rifleman in position. Dawn was coming. Pakenham chose to attack. As the first pale light of dawn crept across the Louisiana lowlands, the British columns stepped off. Ranks of red coats moving together, drums beating the pace, officers on horseback riding alongside with swords drawn. This was how they fought at Salamanca. This was how they defeated the French. Behind the rampart, Jackson's defenders waited with the patience of hunters. Hold fire. Let them come. Do not waste a single shot. Then the entire American line erupted. The artillery fired first. Cannon loaded with grape shot sent clouds of iron balls tearing into the packed British formations. Whole sections of the advancing columns simply ceased to exist. Then the rifles opened up. At this range, these men did not miss. The leading ranks began to dissolve. Men stumbled over the bodies of the men in front of them. Officers screamed orders swallowed by the roar, and then the trap revealed itself. When the first British soldiers finally reached the canal, gasping and stumbling through the carnage, they found a ditch they could not cross and a wall they could not climb. The advance party carrying the fascines and ladders had become separated in the smoke and chaos. They had nothing, no way forward. A carpet of dead behind them, nowhere to go. Pakenham saw his army dying. He did what had always worked. He rode forward. He waved his hat above his head and shouted for his men to advance. His horse was shot from under him. He remounted a staff officer's horse and rode back into the smoke. A volley struck his arm. He kept riding. Then a second impact. Mortal. He slumped forward over the horse's neck. Aides carried him to the base of an oak tree and laid him on the ground. He was dead within minutes. Gibbs, his second in command, rallied a portion of the stalled column and pushed toward the front. Within minutes, he too was struck down, mortally wounded, collapsing on the field. In the span of a few terrible minutes, both of the two most senior British commanders on the battlefield were dead or dying. One final organized effort materialized. A group of Highlanders, the 93rd Regiment of Foot, surged forward with extraordinary, doomed courage. The wail of bagpipes cut through the thunder of cannon. They advanced further toward the American line than any other unit had managed. The concentrated fire tore into their ranks. The pipes fell silent. It was not a battle anymore. It was an execution. When the smoke finally drifted clear, the sight that greeted the American defenders silenced every man on the line. The field was carpeted with red-coated bodies. The heat rising from the mass of fallen men steamed in the cold January air. At a distance, one witness could not tell the difference between the red of the uniforms and the red of the blood. The numbers are almost impossible to process. In under 30 minutes, the British suffered over 2,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. American losses totaled 71. Some accounts place the American dead as low as 13, a ratio of more than 100 to 1. It remains one of the most lopsided military engagements in the entire history of the English-speaking world. The legacy reaches far beyond the casualty list. Had the British taken New Orleans, they would have controlled the gateway to the Mississippi River, the artery feeding the entire American interior. Every barrel of grain, every bale of cotton, every trade route west ran through that city. Whoever held it held the economic throat of the young republic. Jackson's victory did not merely win a battle. It ensured that the continent's most vital waterway remained American. For Andrew Jackson, the battle was a beginning. The gaunt, fever-ridden general who rode into New Orleans with an army of pirates and frontiersmen rode out a national hero. His path from Rodriguez Canal to the White House was straight and direct. He would become the 7th President of the United States, and the mythology of the self-made American warrior, the man who needed no professional army, no European tactics, just will and a muddy ditch, became a cornerstone of American national identity. The men who fell on that field, on both sides, were professionals doing their duty in a war that was already over, in a country most of them had never seen and would never see again. The peace treaty arrived weeks later. The War of 1812 ended as it had been decided, at a table in Belgium, by diplomats who never once set foot in this Louisiana mud. 30 minutes of carnage, and a nation was shaped for a century. That is the Battle of New Orleans.